I'm not making it up. They have carefully scheduled the big interview between Prince Harry, as he is universally known, at least except in Buckingham Palace, where he's known as something quite different, I can assure you. He has arranged at the end of MOATS at 9 p.m. precisely to spill the beans on the rest of his family, except they're nothing as succulent as beans. They are toxic, poisonous gooseberries that will pour forth from his jowls. And it's going to be a bumpy ride for the royals. I told you back then that the royal family would never have a glad, confident morning again after they were stripped of, bereft of the residual respect and admiration for the late Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. But even I, a staunch Republican, did not imagine that the House of Windsor would come tumbling down quite so fast, quite so spectacularly. It is, as I say, Shakespeare couldn't have written it. Tarantino would have had to have written it. Two princes of the royal blood literally rolling around the floor in the palace, with the head of Harry ending up in a dog bowl, not cut from his shoulders as would have been the case in the old days, but his head ended in a dog bowl, and it was all over an American broad. An American broad that William and his wife, Kate, the future Queen of the United Kingdom, used to watch in her particularly salacious sex scenes on Netflix. Come to think of it, it would have made a great Netflix episode. And may yet, The Crown isn't finished yet. At least the series of The Crown isn't finished yet. It's an open question whether the British monarchy can survive. The new book, Spare, by Prince Harry. He's definitely spare. I have no dog in this fight. We're running a poll. Who do you support in the royal punch-up? Harry or William? William's winning it out the park 2-1. There should have been a third option for I don't give a toss unless it is a fight to the death of the monarchy and the absurd Ruritarian fantasy that we can leave the head of stateship to the happenstance of the firstborn male in the family. Thank your lucky stars that it wasn't Harry that was born first, I say to you royalists who continue to hold up the standard, if not high, then at least half-heartedly. The truth is, nobody in any sane frame of mind would be thinking about this matter at all. And yet, if you read the public prints and followed the vulgar tabloid television, you would find that the British are talking of little else. They're not talking about the fact that hundreds of thousands of British workers have had to go on strike in this bleak midwinter to try to at least mitigate the wage cuts that their employers are imposing upon them. They're not talking about the fact that many of them, me included, are now paying 4 times as much to heat our homes as we were at this time last year. 4 times higher. They're not talking about the fact that Britain's unemployment is multiplying, underemployment multiplying, short-time working multiplying, companies going out of business at a faster rate than any other country in the OECD, with a higher rate of inflation than any other country in the OECD other than the Netherlands, about which least said soonest mended. The British are not talking about the fact that our inflation rate is already double-digit and may reach 20% before this 12-month is out. They're not talking about the fact that our recession, in which we are already plunged, is going to be more severe than any country in the OECD. They're not talking about the fact that in this sea of troubles, we are led by King Charles and somebody called Rashid Sunak, who wandered in off the street in Mayfair and was appointed by a handful of people as Britain's Prime Minister. Now, I predicted here just a week or so ago that the Tories were done for unless they brought back Boris Johnson. And guess what? One word from me and the mother of all talk shows, and it's already happening. The Sunday newspapers are filled with news of the plotting that is going on at Westminster and in Whitehall on the simple premise that whilst even Boris Johnson might not be able to win the next election for the Conservatives, he's not going to lose by hundreds of Labour victories. And the more that he mitigates the scale of that defeat, the more Conservative MPs will still be able to call themselves MPs after the next election. And trust me, especially with Conservatives, but followed closely by the so-called Labour Party, the only thing that really matters to most members of Parliament is that they continue to be members of Parliament. They will eat any ordure. They will bite any carpet. They will swallow any lie. They will regurgitate any falsehood, any canard. They will say that black is white and white is black and day is night, and that winter is really a mild summer's day. They'll do anything to remain members of Parliament. And the truth is that if Boris Johnson is their leader, it changes the game, and in a good way for the Conservatives. That's why desperate Dan Hodges is out today batting for the Keir Starmerites that he knows and loves so well, that the Labourites are not really worried about a return of Boris Johnson. In fact, they would quite like that to happen. The truth is the opposite, and the Tories' view is summed up by the otherwise execrable Nadine Dorries in the Mail on Sunday today, when she makes the very point I've just made, but less eloquently. If you want to remain a member of Parliament, you better find a way to reinstate Boris Johnson as Britain's Prime Minister. Not that it will matter much in the great scheme of things, whether Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, or the, Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. Whoever is the Prime Minister of Britain is going to follow the same policies, which are written in Brussels and written in Washington. The economic policies are written in Brussels. The foreign policies are written in Washington. And the British people's interests come a very distant third place. Because Washington is now calling all of the tunes, as more and more of public opinion in Europe is beginning to realize. That's why they have to censor the news. That's why they have to make sure that you never see the truth. It's why you have to keep arguing about William and Harry. It's why they can conduct these bread and circuses so that you will not focus, as, for example, the French people are doing this very weekend, in turning out in their hundreds of thousands on the streets of their country, protesting their government and its foreign and domestic policies. That's happening all over Europe, but you don't know about it because RT has been taken off the air. Sputnik has been taken off the air. We are the last man standing that will tell you about what's happening on the streets of France, on the streets of Prague, on the streets of Germany. We are the last people left telling the truth to a mass audience. And they have to have it that way because it might be catching. There should have been a Christmas truce for the Orthodox Christmas, which falls this weekend. Russia offered Ukraine a ceasefire for Christmas, which could have been built upon, of course, Maybe that's why they turned it down, because they didn't want to build upon it. Although it's difficult to see why. Why any Ukrainian leader would want to continue with the attrition that is massacring huge numbers of increasingly older and increasingly younger Ukrainian conscripts. Either you're in the army already and with a very good chance of being dead, or you're driving around in a top-of-the-range Audi in the rest of Europe. Trust me, I've seen 100 of them over the course of the last few months on the European continent. You've either fled the country if you've got money, or you thought you were too old to be conscripted, but not now. Men over 60 are now being sent into the charnel house at Bakhmut right now, where an epic battle, second only to the battle for Mariupol in this conflict so far, is currently taking place. 60-year-olds and 16-year-olds are currently being shipped into the slaughterhouse of Bakhmut. And Bakhmut is a very strategically important battle. And when the Russian forces prevail, as they will, it may be a massive turning point in the war. It may very well lead to a quick collapse of all remaining Ukrainian forces east of the Dnipro River and the de facto partition of the country. As one Ukrainian minister put it today, we're being offered the Korea solution and a 38th parallel. Well, maybe so, except the partition will not be nearly so kind to Western Ukraine as it was to South Korea. The truth is that the landlocked rump Western Ukrainian state, prey to NATO, prey to Hungary, prey to Polish revanchism, will be a sorry, sorry state of affairs. It will be like Kosovo without the laughs. It will be like Kosovo without anything like the happy ending. The truth is that Ukraine is finished as a state. And I say that with a very heavy heart. I love the Ukrainian people. I never wanted this war to begin. I did my best to raise my voice and win people to my argument that the Minsk II agreements signed by the regime in Kiev, guaranteed by the regimes in Berlin and Paris, guaranteed ultimately by adoption by the Security Council of the United Nations, that Minsk II agreement could bring an end to the long war which had already raged for 7 years in the Donbass, that it had been implemented. But the forces that are keeping the war going right now had no intention of implementing that agreement. Indeed, in a remarkable revelation, remarkably candid revelation, Angela Merkel, the then German Chancellor, recently said in an interview that Minsk was never intended to be implemented. It was to buy time for Ukrainian rearmament, retraining, reinforcement by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And the French government has echoed that. As a piece of insouciant arrogance, rendering all further agreements guaranteed by them null and void before they're even reached, the revelation has not been missed in Moscow or in Beijing. No agreement with these people is worth the paper it isn't even written on. No verbal agreement like the one given to Gorbachev that NATO would not expand 1 inch, I'm quoting, to the east, or the written one in the Minsk agreement. Nothing that these people agree to can be trusted. And so, from Russia's point of view, there's really nothing more to be gained by negotiating with anyone. And I suspect that the prospect of a Christmas ceasefire was the last straw when the Ukrainian government slapped the Russian government in the face with that offer. So it's a battle to the death. Now, before getting on with the show, I just want to talk for a minute about the Middle East, because it's a subject dear to my heart, of course, but because when nobody is paying attention to what's happening in the Middle East, the greatest dangers lie therein. The Iran nuclear deal is dead. Joe Biden told a camera that just a couple of weeks ago, although said to the camera, "We're not going to announce it." He said, announcing it. The Iran nuclear deal is dead. Iran has offered a full, comprehensive reset of its relations with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I hope that that can be achieved. But the fly in the ointment here is somebody called Benjamin Netanyahu, who's back in power in Tel Aviv, though nowadays probably in Jerusalem, in illegally annexed Jerusalem, and he's spoiling for a diversion to take the minds of his own people who were out demonstrating in significant numbers against him in Tel Aviv last night, to divert the attention of the world from the fact that he now leads a government so grisly that it can be described as a chamber of horrors. It can be described as a waxwork museum of some of the most foul political personalities ever assembled in any country as a cabinet. People that even the likes of Sharon, Begin, Shamir, none of the previous Israeli leaders would have agreed even to sit down in the same room as the people who are now running the show in Israel. And while the world's attention is diverted to other theaters like the European theater, there must be a clear and present danger that Netanyahu will launch devastating war against Lebanon, against Syria, and yes, perhaps even against Iran, before the tectonic plates get time to shift and settle down, before the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and China and Russia solidifies, before any possibility of a Saudi-Iranian rapprochement has any possibility of getting out of the tracks. These dangers, dear viewers, are real, clear, and present, and my next guest is best placed to talk about them. Get voting and get your seatbelts on. It's going to be a bumpy night.